what exactly is inside of vegetable oils, and what even are they in the first place? They're probably the most refined kind of cooking oil that exists out there, and they are made up of a wide variety of different kinds of oil, and they're not necessarily made up of the generic consumer vegetables like your cucumbers or your carrots, and they're more so made up of the inedible parts of less well-known plants out there, things such as sunflower oil, rapeseed oil. I think rapeseed oil and canola oil are the same thing, but then you're going to have things like soybean oil, flaxseed oil, and like safflower oil, all that sort of stuff. All this stuff that's relatively unheard of on its own is all sort of put in a big mixer, and firstly you've got to actually process the plant in the first place to actually make this oil edible and safe to eat without basically killing you immediately. And then it's going to be put inside of its processing machines. It's going to be refined to quite a high extent, and then it's going to be packaged and marketed as vegetable oil because there's not really any specific type of oil there. And now obviously the companies that produce these vegetable oils, they're going to name it vegetable oils because when a human sees vegetable, they immediately associate it with healthy. So a human is going to think that even though it's an oil and it contains a lot of fat, which in the generic society is seen as quite an unhealthy thing, they're going to assume vegetable is that's going to be the healthiest possible kind of cooking oil. And that's the kind of things that the government say about vegetable oil as well. They say that vegetable oil is the healthiest kind of oil out there, and it's majority made up of polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are fatty acids which have carbon-carbon double bonds, or multiple, I should say, carbon-carbon double bonds inside of their fatty acid chain, hence the prefix poly instead of mono. Monounsaturated fatty acids like oleic acid are known as mono because they only have one carbon-carbon double bond. Now, there is mounting evidence that when these vegetable oils are used for frying purposes, and they're used to fry food, deep fry food, etc., etc., there is mounting evidence that there are some toxic chemicals that can be produced during these cooking processes. And why would that be when polyunsaturated fatty acids are seen to be the healthiest kind of fat out there? And it is to do with the structure of the fatty acids, and it is to do with the conditions under which these chemical reactions essentially occur. While at face value, polyunsaturated fatty acids have their benefits. I mean, omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, which are polyunsaturated fatty acids, are essential to the body and you can't live without them. At face value, there isn't too much of a problem unless there is something that I'm completely missing here. But when you add in this element of heat, that's when things can start to become a problem, because these carbon-carbon double bonds are more unstable than carbon-carbon single bonds. If you compare the structures of a saturated fatty acid like stearic acid to something like maybe linoleic acid, alpha-linoleic acid, any kind of polyunsaturated fatty acid you can think of, you can see that the PUFAs have more carbon-carbon double bonds inside of their tail. And these carbon-carbon double bonds can undergo chemical reactions essentially. Even though these carbon-carbon double bonds have a higher bond enthalpy, because there are 4 electrons contained inside of the double bond, it is able to undergo additional reactions where electrophiles will be attacked by the electrons inside of this carbon-carbon double bond, and that will cause the bond to break and split. This can mean that when you actually eat your food that has been fried in this vegetable oil, there can be unwanted chemicals contained inside of the thing you're eating from these products of like hydration, reduction, oxidation, and all that sort of stuff. It's not particularly good news, and it's hard to identify any one chemical. There's only a couple chemicals that I know that are really produced from frying, one of them being 4-HNE, 4-hydroxynonenal. This has an OH group and it still has a carbon-carbon double bond, but this OH group probably came from the hydration of one of the alkenes, and this is a certain chemical mechanism where water is used to break the carbon-carbon double bond, and on one of the carbons an H is added, and on the other carbon an OH is added, hence the hydroxyl group contained on side of this molecule. And then at the end of the chain there is an aldehyde group. I can only assume this is from the reduction of the fatty acid, which is weird because oxidation is normally associated with heat, but in these kind of conditions anything can happen basically. It's weird and it's sort of hard to identify, but there is just a lot of mounting evidence. And if you have an understanding of science, you will understand that when exposed to heat, a long carbon-carbon, single bond, straight chain is going to be a lot more stable than one with many carbon-carbon double bonds. And if you have that knowledge but have never sort of associated it or had that thought about it with things such as frying with vegetable oils or other things like lard or butter, and you compare the structure of the two inside of your head, you will probably come to the logical conclusion that frying in something like lard or butter is probably healthier for you because it is a more stable fat. And there are plenty other things that PUFAs produced, and these are known as the category LOPs. Can't remember what it stands for. I think it's lipid oxidation products or something like that. And all of these quite often are carcinogens. 4-HNE is a carcinogen, and there's going to be loads of other random stuff out there that's hard to identify, but it's just essentially a lot of random chemical junk from this high heat reaction, essentially. Now, lard, as opposed to things like vegetable oil, produces virtually no LOPs, and that is because it is a more stable fat. Now, the other argument for vegetable oils is that they contain things like omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, and these are essential nutrients, and things like your brain and the whole myelin sheath, your nerve cells and all that sort of stuff, they all need these omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. I think there's omega-9 as well, but I'm not sure if that's actually essential. But these two are 100% the most important. Now, it's just recommended to eat these omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids when they're uncooked, and eat them and get them from whole foods as well. And I'll talk about the problem of getting your intake of these essential fatty acids from these oils later on in the video. But essentially, frying isn't the best cooking method, and if you can find an alternative, then do. Essentially, frying it's just one of those cooking processes where you never know what you're going to get. All of these oxidation products from the quite quick heat. Frying is quite a quick sort of process compared to baking in an oven or boiling something in a big tub of water or whatever. They're all quite slow processes and much less heat. Water can only go up to 100 degrees centigrade, so anything in there is only going to be able to go up to 100 degrees centigrade as well, and until all the water evaporates, only then can the temperature actually increase, because physics, I suppose. Now, the oils that make up these vegetable oils are often known as seed oils, and these are oils that are derived from the seeds of these plants. Things like sunflower oil are derived from sunflower seeds themselves, and there are loads and loads of seed oils where the seed is completely inedible, if that makes sense. You're going to have, I think it's canola oil and cottonseed oil. All of these seeds that the oil has come from are completely inedible and are very, very toxic, but when you refine them enough, they actually become safe to eat. Not that that's necessarily it's going to be healthy for you, but they become safe and edible enough so that you're not going to die as you eat it, essentially. Now, these seed oils and vegetable oils are often found inside of processed foods, and they contain a lot of omega-6, which is seen as quite a healthy thing. It's an essential fatty acid. However, the problem is that there isn't much omega-3 contained inside of these seed oils, and henceforth processed foods as well. And processed foods make up the majority of the common person's diet nowadays in the first place. And so the ratios of omega-6 to omega-3 in the modern person's diet can be as high as 20 parts omega-6 to 1 part omega-3, when the actual optimal ratio, normal ratio, is supposed to just be 1 to 1. And when you have this screwed up ratio and you have more omega-6 than omega-3, this can lead to a lot of inflammation. Inflammation is probably the main thing that omega-6 causes when it's in this completely screwed up ratio. And again, essentially the moral of this story, I suppose, is to just eat whole foods rather than processed foods that contain all these seed oils. If you eat a whole food balanced diet, you will get a correct ratio. If you have a couple of seeds in one of your meals, and then you have some fish or something in another, and that's spread out across the week, you will be fine, essentially. Maybe you can supplement it with some fish oil and make sure that you've just got the ratios absolutely how you want them to be. But eating whole foods is basically an easy gateway to not having this inflammation and screwed up ratio, because the more you eat processed foods, the harder it will be to balance up this ratio, because you're having so much omega-6, you have to actively offset it with omega-3. And the only way you're going to be doing that, if the ratio is literally 20 to 1, is with a whole ton of supplements. So just cutting down on the processed food and the seed oils, especially when frying, because of the stuff that I talked about earlier, that can be a good way to balance out your ratios. Now, another issue, I suppose, with these seeds is that some can contain phytoestrogens and estrogenic compounds. I've talked about this with soy before, but the other common culprit is flaxseed. These two are the highest things in phytoestrogens, and I suppose in this case there aren't really any comparative benefits of these two food products compared to other things. Like, you can find any benefits of soy and flaxseed in other things. I think chia seeds are basically flax seeds but without the phytoestrogen, so there's no point in having flax seeds if you can just have chia seeds and have a less disrupted hormone system, if that makes sense. As much as I suppose with these foods the benefits would still outweigh the negatives, you can get those benefits easily in other foods without the negatives, so you might as well do that. And soybean oil and flaxseed oil in varying varieties can be found in vegetable oils. Vegetable oils, you don't actually really know what's inside of it. It's just a load of refined seeds and it's all put into one. It's not really the healthiest oil for you in the first place. I would recommend drinking olive oil over vegetable oil, even though society says that PUFAs are better for you than monounsaturated fatty acids and saturated fatty acids, which olive oil contains more of than these vegetable oils. If you think of the consistency of olive oil compared to vegetable oil has basically no sort of thickness to it whatsoever. But if you look at olive oil, when you're pouring it out of the thing, it's a lot thicker than these vegetable oils. And these vegetable oils are often contained inside of the low quality plastic containers and the plastic bottles. These will contain a lot of nasty plasticizing chemicals like BPA, and because BPA and all of these other things are fat soluble, they're going to have a very easy time leaching into the things. And olive oil is often produced in a more high quality environment, and the plastics that it's packaged in are harder, and sometimes it's even put inside of glass or metal, which is so much healthier for you than it being put in this low quality compressible plastic. With that, I recommend subscribing for more content like this, and have a good day.